Hey, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. She knew the White House would feel overwhelming, but she didn't expect the first thing she heard to be the steady hum of a dozen flat screens turning over live financial data. Not cable news, internal dashboards, bond spreads, credit markets, unemployment feeds updating in real time. A reminder that this wasn't history class. This was right now. It was her first day as a junior economic policy analyst. She'd barely set down her bag when someone handed her a secure tablet already populated with briefing notes. A second staffer dropped a stack of hard copy folders on her desk, each stamped with crisis-level labels she'd only ever seen in case studies: housing collapse, bank stability, auto industry viability, numbers that didn't wait for her to settle in. Outside, the city was electric. The National Mall packed, broadcasters running continuous coverage, millions of people watching a new president take the oath. Barack Obama stepping forward on a wave of hope the country desperately wanted to believe in. Inside the West Wing, that hope was met with an equally powerful emotion: fear. Not panic, just the quiet, focused kind that shows up when the stakes are higher than anyone admits out loud. She opened the first file, then the second, then the third. Every chart sloped downward. Every projection looked worse than the one before it. The economy wasn't slipping, it was falling. And she had walked into her dream job on the same day the country was trying to steady itself under a new leader. Two worlds, a hopeful crowd outside, and a team inside bracing for the hardest economic repair job in a generation. So how does a moment built on national optimism collide so sharply with the reality waiting behind the West Wing's doors? Why would a rookie analyst find herself staring down the worst economic landscape in decades on her very first day? And on January 20th, 2009, how did one inauguration become the starting point for the hardest financial recovery effort of a generation? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date of the year has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, January 20th, that story takes us to 2009, when leadership walked into a burning economy. Now, it's important to understand that the financial crisis didn't break suddenly. It cracked, then it buckled, then it fell apart piece by piece throughout 2008. By the time winter arrived, the damage was visible everywhere. Frozen credit markets, collapsing banks, massive layoffs, a house sector in freefall. The outgoing administration had already launched extraordinary rescue measures: the TARP program, emergency liquidity facilities from the Federal Reserve, and a series of interventions meant to keep the system from imploding outright. Those actions slowed the collapse, but slowing it wasn't the same as stopping it. And that's the world that our fictional analyst stepped into on her first day. Her job title sounded modest, junior economic policy analyst, but the world in front of her didn't feel modest at all. She wasn't crafting speeches or negotiating with agencies. She was doing the unglamorous work that mattered when stakes were high: updating spreadsheets, maintaining dashboards, organizing data, and keeping the information flowing between the people who made decisions. During her first internal briefing, the situation was laid out plainly. Markets were still unstable, foreclosures were still rising, unemployment numbers were still climbing. The rescue actions from the previous administration had bought some breathing room, but the economy was nowhere near recovery. Confidence, the fragile ingredient the markets depended on, it hadn't returned yet. And she could feel that tension in the building. Not panic, not defeat, just a focused urgency. A sense that she had arrived at a moment where every data point mattered and every hour lost could turn a bad downturn into something far worse. The outgoing team had tried to plug the holes. The incoming team now had to figure out how to rebuild the structure around those holes. The turning point came not from a single decision, but from the handoff, the shift from emergency stabilization to long-term recovery planning. She saw it in small things first. The folders arriving on her desk changed tone. The early packets were filled with summaries of what had already been done: capital injections, large bank backstops, crisis-era lending facilities. But the new binders, they were starting to feel different. They weren't about stopping the collapse, they were about preventing the next one. Later on, she watched senior analysts debate the scale and timing of a national recovery effort. They weren't starting from scratch, they were inheriting the scaffolding built in the final months of the previous administration, the triage measures that kept the system from detaching entirely. But now the question was, how do we push past triage and into stabilization, and then into growth? Over time, her role stayed the same: carry the numbers, update the projections, ensure nothing got lost. But the tone of the work shifted. Discussions widened from what's failing to what can still be saved to where can momentum be created. She watched models as unemployment projections were updated, job creation estimates redefined, and stimulus options tested against market sensitivity. The business lesson became clear pretty fast. Government action in a crisis isn't just policy or math, it's sequencing. Signal too late, markets panic. Move too soon, credibility cracks. Every decision was a balance between certainty and speed. And somewhere between the binders, the late-night edits, and the constant recalculations, she understood that crisis response wasn't a reset, it was a relay. One team had passed the baton under pressure, now another had to run the next leg of it without dropping it. That, more than anything, was the real turning point. The economy wasn't being abandoned to fate, it was being handed forward. Over the following months, the work shifted from crisis management to reconstruction. Stabilization efforts began taking hold, credit markets thawed, major banks regained footing. The auto industry pulled back from the edge. None of it happened fast, and none of it happened cleanly. Recovery arrived in waves. A positive jobs report here, a setback there, but the trajectory began to tilt upward instead of down. Inside government, she watched how much of the recovery depended on coordination rather than heroics. The stimulus programs rolled out in phases, once again about timing. Infrastructure spending hit state budgets in uneven pulses. Business lending opened slowly, then steadily. Consumer confidence lagged, then lifted, then dipped again, before finding traction. None of this was linear, none of this was elegant, but it held. And actually, she saw a longer lesson forming. In a modern economy, stability isn't a single action, it's a sequence. Markets responding to signals, businesses responding to clarity, and people responding to whether they believe the floor beneath them is solid. Leadership didn't erase the Great Recession. It steadied the system long enough for the gears to re-engage. Years later, when she looked back at charts she once updated hourly, she could see the arc clearly. Employment trending back, growth returning, industries adapting, regulations reshaped, a financial system that had buckled but it didn't break. That long view wasn't obvious on her first morning. On day one, the numbers looked like a cliff. But the recovery, slow, uneven, imperfect, proved that even the worst downturns can be reversed with structure, discipline, and sustained pressure in the right places. And that applies whether you're talking about the U.S. government or your local bakery. And all of that forward motion began on January 20th, 2009. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please do not forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you actually want to understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting bsnsdailypodcast.com.
We all crave something new. At Hertz, new is what we're all about. New adventures, new experiences. When you book with us, you'll be cruising in our newest fleet yet. New features, new tech, and of course, that new car smell. All that wonderful newness, all with no strings attached. So go on, book your new car fling at Hertz.com. Your old car at home never has to know.